They say weddings are supposed to bring families together, but as I stood in that glittering hall, I wasn't there to celebrate my sister's happiness. I was there to watch her world collapse. The chandeliers above the ballroom glowed with a golden warmth that seemed to drip over every silk ribbon, every polished glass, every flower centerpiece like liquid honey. To anyone else, it looked like a dream, a perfect American wedding, the kind you'd see in glossy magazines, complete with ivory drapes and a string quartet that played so softly it made conversations hum like poetry. Guests whispered in awe about the extravagance. The money poured into each detail, the way my sister glided across the room as though she owned not just the night, but every single person's gaze. And I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding against my ribs, not with joy, but with a fury so sharp it felt like ice cutting through me. My hands trembled, though not from nerves or sentiment. They trembled from the sheer restraint it took not to scream out right then, not to rip the mask off her face in front of everyone who believed this charade of purity and romance. I watched as she made her grand entrance, her dress glimmering under the lights like spun diamonds. The veil cascaded down her back, framing her in false innocence. She looked radiant, yes, but only to those who didn't know the truth. To me, she was dressed in stolen dreams. Every pearl that glittered on her bodice was one I had paid for with my trust. Every flower in that hall, watered by my humiliation. Every smile on her lips built on the ashes of what she had taken from me. The crowd erupted in admiration. "She's breathtaking," I heard someone whisper. Another sighed. "She's the luckiest bride in the world." Their words sliced into me, each one reminding me that no one here knew the real story. No one except me. They saw her as a princess, but I saw the thief who had gutted me, the liar who had stripped me of dignity and then paraded her success like a crown. My chest tightened as anger rippled through me. She had the audacity to walk down that aisle as if she was untouchable, as if she had won. And yet, just beneath the polished surface of her fairy tale, I knew the truth was simmering like a volcano, ready to erupt. And when it did, she would wish she had never betrayed me. Still, a part of me hurt. As much as my anger burned, there was heartbreak tangled inside it. This was my sister, the girl I once built blanket forts with, the girl I defended in schoolyard fights, the girl I whispered my dreams to late at night. And now she stood there, basking in the love of everyone around her, knowing full well that she had stabbed me in the back and smiled while doing it. That heartbreak didn't dull my rage, it sharpened it. Because betrayal hurts more when it comes from the one person you swore would never do it. The music swelled as she approached her groom, her future, her lie. The applause thundered, echoing through the hall like a celebration of everything false. I looked around, my eyes landing on my parents, my relatives, family, friends, all glowing with pride. Not one of them suspected the rot beneath the roses. Not one of them knew that this wedding was built on my pain, and not one of them realized that I was about to tear it all apart. Suspense swirled in my veins, a heady mix of dread and anticipation. I could feel it in my fingertips, in the way my breath came slow and deliberate. I had planned this moment, rehearsed it in my head 1,000 times, but being here, standing in the reality of it, made every nerve in my body feel electrified. The temptation to strike now, to let it all out in one scream of vengeance, was intoxicating. But no, timing was everything, and she had always underestimated me. She thought I would stay quiet. She thought I would swallow the betrayal, just like I had before. She thought I was weak, but tonight she would learn that her greatest mistake wasn't stealing from me. It was underestimating me. The groom smiled down at her, eyes brimming with love that made me want to laugh and choke at the same time. If only he knew what she really was. If only he had seen the venom that hid beneath her smile. If only he understood that the woman he was vowing his life to was a fraud draped in white. But soon he would. They all would. The pastor cleared his throat, ready to begin. My sister lifted her chin, smug and certain, her smile almost daring me to watch her win again. But she didn't know what I held in my pocket. She didn't know the secret I carried in my hands like a dagger waiting for the perfect moment. She didn't know that tonight her carefully built empire of lies would come crashing down, not quietly, not privately, but in front of every single soul she had tried to impress. The sound of the church bells rang outside, their echo seeping into the hall. People whispered about the beauty of it, the poetry of such a perfect day. But to me, those bells weren't a blessing. They were a funeral dirge, not for love, but for the illusion my sister had spent years crafting. When the truth came out, the gas echoed louder than the church bells, but to understand how I got here, you need to hear what she did to me. If anyone had told me my sister would one day be my enemy, I would have laughed in their face. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still see the little girl with tangled hair and scraped knees who used to run barefoot across our backyard, laughing so loudly it felt like joy itself had a voice. That little girl was my sister, my shadow, my partner in every silly adventure we dreamed up as children. To the outside world, she was just my sibling, but to me, she was my other half. We shared everything: toys, secrets, fears, and even the same worn-out quilt we would hide under late at night, whispering about the kind of women we would become one day. If you had asked me back then, I would have sworn that nothing and no one could ever break us apart. I can still remember the summer nights when we would sneak outside after our parents had gone to bed. We would lie on the grass, staring up at the stars, trying to trace constellations with our small fingers. She used to say, "One day we'll both be so successful, people will look up at us like we're stars." And I believed her. I believed every word that came out of her mouth because she wasn't just my sister. She was my compass. When I felt scared, she told me stories that calmed me. When I felt insecure, she was the one who swore I was stronger than anyone else. She had this way of making me feel like I wasn't alone in the world, and for a long time, that was enough. Growing up, I saw us as a team against everything. I remember the day a group of girls cornered me at school, mocking me for the hand-me-down clothes I wore. I tried to hold my head high, but before I could even answer, my sister stormed in like a little warrior. She shoved her way into the circle, glared at every single one of them, and said, "Say one more word about my sister, and you'll regret it." The girls backed off, and I felt so safe, so loved, so proud to have her by my side. That memory stayed etched in my heart as proof that we were unshakable. But even in those golden moments of closeness, there were tiny fissures that I ignored. Small things, subtle things that I brushed away as just sibling rivalry, like how she always wanted to go first when we played games, or how she would pout when I won, how she insisted on borrowing my things but never wanted to lend hers, or the time we both tried out for the school play, and when I got the lead role, she refused to speak to me for weeks. I thought those moments were normal, harmless. After all, every sibling has spats, right? I told myself it was nothing serious. But looking back now, I can see those cracks for what they really were. Signs of something deeper, something I should have noticed. As we grew older, our bond seemed to evolve. But those patterns remained. I was the peacemaker, the one who let her win arguments because it was easier to keep the peace than to fight. She was fiery, magnetic, the kind of person who could walk into a room and pull every pair of eyes toward her. I admired her, sometimes even envied her confidence. And whenever she cut me down with a sharp comment or rolled her eyes at my dreams, I convinced myself that it was just her way of pushing me, motivating me, making me stronger. That's what I told myself because the truth, that she might actually resent me, was too painful to accept. Our parents used to laugh about it. "You two are inseparable," they'd say, smiling as though our bond was some eternal guarantee. They loved watching us share inside jokes at the dinner table or plan out elaborate birthday surprises for each other. To them, we were proof that family meant loyalty, and I clung to that belief because I wanted it to be true more than anything. But even as we entered our teenage years, I began to notice a change. She started keeping things from me, little secrets that felt bigger than they were. She'd tell me she was going one place and end up somewhere else. She'd spend hours with friends I didn't know, then come home and act like I was the last person she wanted to talk to. It hurt, but I told myself it was just her growing up, pulling away, finding her own identity. After all, wasn't that what siblings did? You drift apart, then drift back together. That's what I kept telling myself. And yet, there were moments when I felt her jealousy as sharply as a blade, like the day I won a scholarship that she had also applied for. I was so proud, so excited, but when I ran to tell her, I could see the storm behind her forced smile. "Good for you," she said, her tone flat, her eyes dark. I wanted to believe she was just disappointed in herself, not angry at me. But later that night, I overheard her on the phone saying, "She doesn't deserve it. She always gets everything." Her words cut me deeper than I could admit. Still, I forgave her. I always forgave her. Because she was my sister. Because I believed that love, real love, covered everything. I wanted us to stay close, to stay whole. So I ignored the sting, ignored the warning signs, ignored the way her victories always mattered more than mine in her eyes. Looking back now, I realize I mistook her hunger for attention as love, her need to control as care, her constant competition as normal sibling rivalry. But it wasn't. It was the early shadow of something much darker. If I had opened my eyes then, maybe I could have braced myself for what was coming. Maybe I could have protected myself before she sank her claws so deep into my life that I almost couldn't pull them out. But I didn't. I loved her too much. I believed in her too much. And that blind faith was the rope she would one day use to hang me. I mistook her hunger for love, when really she was hungry for more dangerous things. The cracks didn't appear all at once. They crept in quietly, like shadows at dusk. For years I clung to the memories of our childhood bond, convincing myself that no matter how life changed, my sister and I were unbreakable. But as the seasons shifted and adolescence turned into adulthood, those little moments of rivalry I once dismissed began to feel heavier, sharper, less innocent. What I had brushed aside as sibling spats were not harmless at all. They were the earliest cracks in the glass, warning signs of a fracture that would eventually shatter everything. It began with small lies, the kind you almost want to excuse because they seem so trivial. She'd tell me she was staying late at school for practice, but then I'd hear from someone else that she'd been at a party. She'd borrow money for something important, but then post pictures of new clothes or gadgets she bought. When I confronted her, she'd laugh it off, saying, "You're too serious. Don't make such a big deal out of everything." And because I loved her, because I wanted peace, I swallowed my frustration and told myself she didn't mean any harm. But the lies weren't the only thing. She had a way of making me the punchline, of turning my insecurities into entertainment. At family gatherings, she'd mock the way I laughed, exaggerating it until everyone was chuckling at my expense. Or she'd joke about how I was book smart, but not people smart, planting seeds in people's minds that I was awkward, unworthy, less than her. I would smile through it, even laugh along, because what else could I do? Call her out and look like I couldn't take a joke? It felt easier to pretend it didn't bother me, though inside, it cut deeper than I let on. One afternoon stands out in my memory like a splinter I can't pull out. I was walking home from school when I passed by a cafe and heard her voice drifting through the open window. She was inside with a group of friends, and I paused, curious to surprise her. But then her words froze me in place. She was laughing, telling them how pathetic I was, how I cried too easily, how I was always tagging along because I didn't have real friends of my own. Her friends laughed with her, feeding off her performance, and I stood outside on the sidewalk, rooted in place, feeling my face burn with humiliation. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I told myself she was just insecure, that she needed to make herself look bigger by making me look smaller. I repeated those words like a mantra, desperate to believe them, because the alternative, that she genuinely thought I was pathetic, was too painful. When I walked away from that cafe, I swore I wouldn't hold it against her. But a part of me cracked that day, just a hairline fracture, small enough to hide but deep enough to matter. Her competition with me grew more obvious as we got older. At first, I thought it was just natural. After all, siblings often compare themselves to each other. But with her, it wasn't a comparison. It was a battle. If I got an A on a test, she needed an A+. If I got a compliment from our parents, she needed to outshine it with something louder, bigger, flashier. When I landed my first job, instead of congratulating me, she brushed it off with a dismissive, "That's nice, but I'm holding out for something better." I started to notice how carefully she kept score. If someone praised me, she'd immediately find a way to redirect the attention to herself. If I mentioned a dream, she'd either belittle it or declare she'd achieved something grander. At first, I resisted admitting it because it hurt too much to see her not as my ally but as my rival. I didn't want to believe my sister saw me as competition, so I closed my eyes to it, convinced myself it was all in my head, told myself I was being paranoid. But deep down, I knew. I knew every time her smile didn't quite reach her eyes when I succeeded. I knew every time her compliments came laced with bitterness. One night, we were sitting together after dinner, flipping through old photo albums. I pointed out a picture of us as kids, grinning with ice cream dripping down our hands, and I laughed, saying, "We look so happy." Without missing a beat, she muttered, "Yeah, because back then, you didn't think you were better than me." Her words sliced through the air, sharp and heavy. I laughed it off, pretended not to care, but inside, it left me reeling. Since when did she think I believed I was better than her? I had never even allowed myself to think that way. She was always the bold one, the beautiful one, the one people noticed. But in her eyes, my quiet successes were threats. I tried to bridge the gap between us, tried to remind her that we were supposed to be a team. I invited her into my life, celebrated her achievements louder than I did my own, downplayed my wins so she wouldn't feel overshadowed. I thought if I just loved her harder, if I just gave her more space to shine, the cracks would heal. But they didn't. They widened, because it was never about me not loving her enough. It was about her hunger, a hunger I couldn't satisfy, no matter how much I gave. Looking back now, I can see how those early betrayals were rehearsals for the bigger ones. The lies, the mockery, the jealousy, they were practice runs, each one teaching her how far she could push me before I pushed back. And every time I stayed silent, every time I forgave, I gave her permission to take a little more, to test the boundaries of my loyalty, to sharpen her cruelty in private before unveiling it in ways that would cost me everything. It's painful to admit, but somewhere deep down, I think I always knew. I always sensed that she didn't just want love, she wanted to win. She needed to be above me, no matter the cost. And because I was too blind with hope, too desperate for the sister I thought I had, I let her win battles she should never have fought. I let her paint me as weak, needy, disposable, all because I wanted to keep the bond alive. But competition is one thing. Sibling rivalry I could have lived with. Even her cruel jokes, her jealousy, her lies. I could have forgiven them, painful as they were. What I couldn't forgive was what came next. Because what she did next wasn't a joke, or a rivalry, or even just cruelty. It was pure theft wrapped in sisterly smiles. But competition is one thing. What she did next was pure theft wrapped in sisterly smiles. It started with a simple request, the kind of favor sisters are supposed to grant without hesitation. I still remember the way she asked me. Her voice was soft, almost trembling, carrying the kind of vulnerability that made my heart ache instantly. She came to me one evening, her eyes glossy, her tone wrapped in desperation, and she said, "I wouldn't ask you if it wasn't important. I really need your help." It was the kind of plea only a sister could make, and because of everything we had been through together, the childhood memories, the secrets under blankets, the shared promises of never abandoning each other, I didn't hesitate. My instinct was to protect her, to support her, to do whatever it took to make sure she was okay. She painted such a convincing picture. She told me she had an opportunity she couldn't pass up, that it would set her life on a better path. She flattered me, telling me how much she admired my stability, my discipline, my ability to save money while she struggled. "You've always been the strong one," she whispered, her voice cracking just enough to make me believe it wasn't rehearsed. "You're the only person I can count on. Please don't let me drown." How could I say no? How could I look into my sister's pleading eyes and tell her that her pain wasn't my responsibility? That's not what sisters do. Sisters step in. Sisters share burdens. Sisters make sacrifices. So I nodded, telling her I would help, convincing myself that I was doing the right thing, that one day she would pay me back, not just with money, but with gratitude and renewed closeness. But what I didn't realize in that moment was that she wasn't just asking for help. She was testing me, and by saying yes, I wasn't rescuing her. I was stepping into a carefully crafted trap. At first, it was just a small amount, manageable. She promised it was temporary, that she would pay me back within a few weeks. But weeks turned into months, and soon the requests grew bolder, the amounts larger. Each time she wrapped her plea in layers of manipulation, guilt-tripping me by reminding me of everything she'd done for me in the past, or by questioning whether I truly loved her enough to support her dreams. If you can't trust your own sister, who can you trust? She'd ask, her tone sharp enough to sting. And I gave in. Over and over I gave in, because I wanted to believe in her. I wanted to believe in us. My savings account dwindled, and with every transfer, I told myself it was temporary, that she was on the verge of something great, that she would pay me back the moment she could. I imagined us laughing about it one day, telling the story of how I helped her when no one else would, how my sacrifice made her success possible. I clung to that fantasy because the alternative, that she was using me, was too devastating to accept. Meanwhile, my family looked at her as though she was a shining star. She strutted around with new clothes, expensive dinners, glamorous nights out, and when people asked how she afforded it, she spun stories about hard work and promotions. They applauded her ambition, her glow, her apparent success, and I stood in the shadows, biting my tongue, knowing that the truth was that her glow was fueled by the money I had bled to give her. The worst part wasn't even the money itself. It was the silence I carried, the way I couldn't bring myself to tell anyone the truth. Because if I did, I knew what would happen. She would twist it. She would tell everyone I was jealous, bitter, trying to tear her down. And deep down, I feared they might believe her. So I stayed quiet, even as I struggled to pay my own bills, even as I sacrificed my own comfort for hers. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my chest heavy with anger and heartbreak. How could she look me in the eye, call me her rock, and then turn around and flaunt my sacrifices as though they were her triumphs? How could she let our parents praise her while knowing I was the one carrying the weight of her dreams? I started to notice patterns in her timing. She always asked when I was vulnerable, when I was tired, when I had just come home from a long day, when my defenses were low. She always prefaced her requests with sweetness, with reminders of our bond, with lines like, "You're the only person who really understands me." It was like she had studied me, learned how to pierce through my armor with precision. And every time I handed her the money, I felt the sting of betrayal. But I told myself it was worth it, that she would come through for me one day, that she wouldn't forget. But the truth was, she wasn't thinking about one day. She was thinking about right now. And in her world, right now was all that mattered. The more she took, the more entitled she became. It wasn't gratitude I saw in her eyes anymore. It was expectation. It was as though she had decided that my money was hers, that my sacrifices were her right, not her privilege. She stopped saying thank you and started saying, "I need this." And when I hesitated, she'd tilt her head, sigh dramatically, and say, "Wow, after everything we've been through, you're really going to let me fail?" Those words tore at me, because she knew exactly what string to pull. My fear of losing her. She knew that as long as she framed it as a choice between money and our bond, I would choose her every time. And I did. But slowly the truth began to gnaw at me. Late at night, when the house was quiet and my bank account screamed at me in red numbers, I started to feel the weight of it pressing down on my chest. This wasn't sisterly love. This wasn't sacrifice. This was exploitation. And I had walked right into it. I began to resent her, though I buried it under forced smiles and nods of understanding. I watched as our parents gushed about her responsibility and hard work, while my own sacrifices remained invisible. I bit my tongue until it bled, but inside I screamed. I wanted to stand up and tell them all that she was nothing but a fraud, that her so-called independence was built on the back of my silence. But I didn't, not yet. Because even then, some foolish part of me wanted to believe she would do the right thing, that she would come to me one day, tears in her eyes, and say, "I couldn't have done it without you. Thank you." That she would pay me back, not just the money, but the faith I had poured into her. But that day never came, and it never would, because what I thought was an investment in her future was really the down payment for my own destruction. I thought I was helping her chase a dream, but I was really funding her betrayal. A loan between sisters should be sacred, but with her it became a weapon. When she first borrowed the money, I held on to hope. I told myself she just needed time, that she would make good on her word. I wasn't naive enough to expect the repayment instantly, but I believed that at the very least she would try. That's what sisters do. They keep their promises, especially when trust is on the line. But as weeks turned into months, that hope began to curdle into something bitter. The calls and texts I sent about repayment were met with silence, or worse, Laughter. "Oh my God, you're acting like a loan shark," she'd scoff, waving her hand dismissively whenever I brought it up. "Relax. I'll pay you back when I can. Don't make this weird." But the weeks stretched into half a year, then longer, and not a single dollar ever made its way back to me. What made it unbearable wasn't just the absence of repayment, it was the arrogance with which she flaunted her life in front of me. She strutted around in new outfits, dined at high-end restaurants, traveled for weekend getaways with friends, and posted every glittering detail on social media for the world to admire. Meanwhile, I was juggling bills, skipping luxuries, and quietly rearranging my life around the debt she had saddled me with. Every picture she posted, every boast she made, was a slap in the face. I wasn't just invisible, I was a prop. She built her image of independence and glamour on money that wasn't hers, but she made sure I was painted as the bitter sister lurking in the shadows. When I dared to raise the issue, she rolled her eyes and accused me of being dramatic. "God, you're so obsessed with money. Do you ever get tired of being so uptight?" She sneered once, her words sharp enough to draw blood. It got worse when the family got involved. I thought if I could at least confide in our parents, they would see the truth and help mediate. But when I told them how much I had lent her, their expressions hardened. Not toward her, but toward me. "Why would you even give her so much if you couldn't afford it?" my father asked, his tone more scolding than concerned. My mother shook her head, saying, "You need to stop nagging her. She's under so much stress right now. Don't make things harder for her." The injustice of it burned. Me alive. I was the one sacrificing, the one bleeding dry, but somehow I became the villain. They looked at me as if I was petty, greedy, jealous of her success. And she let them. No, she encouraged it. She leaned into the role of the stressed, struggling sister who was just trying to make something of herself, while I became the bitter sibling trying to hold her back. It was a performance, and she played it so well that the audience clapped for her lies. I wanted to scream, to stand in the middle of the room and shout the truth until someone listened. But every time I opened my mouth, she twisted my words, painting me as insecure, controlling, unloving. The more she gaslit me, the more I questioned myself. Was I overreacting? Was I being unfair? Was I truly as jealous as she claimed? The self-doubt was its own kind of prison, keeping me silent even as my savings evaporated. The humiliation of it all was suffocating. I watched her climb higher and higher on a ladder I had built, while I sank lower into the quicksand of resentment. My stomach knotted every time the family praised her, every time they told me I should learn from her ambition. They didn't know that ambition had teeth, that it had chewed me up and spit me out while she wore a crown made of my sacrifices. Late at night, I would lie in bed replaying every conversation, every manipulation, every time she turned my love into leverage. I felt the heartbreak of realizing that my sister wasn't the person I thought she was. And maybe she never had been. That thought was almost unbearable, so I clung to excuses. Maybe she just needed more time. Maybe once her situation improved, she'd make things right. Maybe she was too proud to admit how much she owed me. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't about pride or struggle. This was about power. She enjoyed it. That's what twisted the knife deeper than anything else. She enjoyed watching me squirm, watching me weaken under the weight she piled on my shoulders. Every dismissive laugh, every flippant remark, every public display of her success was a reminder that she had me exactly where she wanted me. Silent, suffering, and invisible. The anger began to grow inside me like a storm cloud. It wasn't the explosive kind of anger that bursts and fades. No, it was the slow burning kind, the kind that simmers until it's molten and unstoppable. I started to imagine what it would feel like to expose her, to peel back the mask in front of everyone who adored her. The thought alone gave me a rush, a tiny taste of triumph in a sea of despair. But just as that anger threatened to consume me, heartbreak always pulled me back. Because as much as I wanted revenge, I still loved her. She was my sister, and love has a cruel way of chaining you to your betrayer, making you hesitate when you should run, making you forgive when you should fight. I wanted to believe there was still a chance she'd redeem herself, that she would wake up one day and realize what she'd done to me, that she'd apologize, repay me, and we could rebuild. That hope was the cruelest part of all, because it kept me in the prison she had designed. The suspense built with every unanswered text, every ignored call, Every family dinner where she basked in praise while I bit my tongue. I felt like I was living in a nightmare that no one else could see. And then, just when I thought the silence couldn't be more unbearable, she shattered it with a confession that nearly knocked the air from my lungs. It happened casually, almost carelessly, like she was tossing a grenade over her shoulder without even looking back. We were sitting in her apartment, the air thick with unspoken tension, when I pressed her once again about the money. She sighed, rolled her eyes, and then smirked. "You really want to know where it went?" she asked, her tone dripping with mockery. I braced myself, but nothing could have prepared me for her answer. And then she told me where all that money had gone, and my stomach dropped. Every rose in her wedding bouquet, every diamond in her tiara, every pearl on her dress, had my name written on it. When the truth finally slipped from her lips, it was so simple, so casual, that for a moment my brain refused to process it. She leaned back on her couch, swirling a glass of wine as though she were confessing nothing more than what she had eaten for lunch, and said, "The money? I used it for my wedding." The words hit me like a blow to the chest. I stared at her, searching her face for some sign that she was joking, exaggerating, saying something outrageous just to hurt me. But there was no hesitation, no shame. Her smirk told me everything. She meant it. All of it. Images rushed through my mind in rapid succession. The envelopes of cash I had given her, the wire transfers, the savings I had chipped away at over months, all funneled into a celebration that was supposed to symbolize love and partnership. But for me, it symbolized something entirely different. It symbolized betrayal. It symbolized the theft of my trust, my sacrifices, my very future. "Your wedding?" I whispered, my voice cracking as if the words themselves were too heavy to carry. She nodded, unapologetic. "Yeah, you wouldn't want your sister to look cheap on the biggest day of her life, would you?" Her arrogance was staggering. She said it like it was common sense, like my role in her life was to bankroll her happiness without question. I felt my stomach twist, my hands go cold. Shock washed over me first, but it didn't stay long, because almost instantly that shock boiled into anger so fierce it made my vision blur. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tell her how dare she, how vile, how heartless. But the words lodged in my throat. My heart was breaking even as rage surged through me. How could she do this? How could she look me in the eye and admit that she had stolen from me, not for survival, not for necessity, but for luxury, for flowers and dresses and diamonds? The days that followed were like living inside a nightmare. Everywhere I turned, I was reminded of what she had done. She bragged to her friends about the lavish details of her upcoming wedding, the designer gown, the expensive venue, the custom cake, and every time she listed something off, I could feel the phantom weight of dollar bills leaving my hands. I sat there, invisible, as she spun stories of her hard work and savings, painting herself as the picture of discipline and ambition. She erased me completely. I wasn't just absent from her story. I was rewritten as an afterthought, a footnote that didn't matter. And the worst part, people believed her. They looked at her with admiration, praising her dedication, her vision, her ability to create such a dream wedding. And I stayed silent, swallowing my anger like poison, choking on the injustice of it. There was one evening that stands out in particular, a moment that crystallized the heartbreak and humiliation. We were sitting with some of her bridesmaids, going over details for the rehearsal dinner. I had been quiet most of the evening, too raw to pretend excitement. Out of nowhere, she laughed and said, "You know, I'm not even sure I want you in the wedding party. You're kind of negative, and honestly, I can't have you bringing down the vibe. My wedding has to be perfect, and I just don't think you fit the look I'm going for." Her words landed like a knife twisting in my chest. She wasn't just stealing from me anymore. She was discarding me, throwing me aside as though I were nothing more than a blemish on her perfect day. She didn't just take my money, she took my place. She took my dignity. And in front of her friends, she laughed about it, as though cutting me out of her life was some kind of fashionable decision. The heartbreak in that moment was suffocating. I wanted to cry, to beg, to ask her how she could do this to me, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. So I smiled, nodded, and let the silence stretch between us like a chasm. Inside, though, I was unraveling. The suspense grew heavier with each passing day as the wedding approached. The invitations went out, the decorations were finalized, the fittings scheduled, and every single detail was a reminder that I was the silent investor, the ghost benefactor of a wedding that wasn't mine. It was as if she had taken pieces of my life and stitched them into her fairy tale dress, parading around in the spoils of my sacrifices. But something else was growing inside me, too. Beneath the heartbreak and the anger, there was a seed of resolve, a whisper that grew louder with every smug look she threw my way, every dismissive laugh, every lie she told to keep me in the shadows. That whisper said, "She thinks she's won, but this isn't over." I began to see her differently, no longer as my sister, no longer as my family. She had crossed a line so deep it could never be redrawn. She had transformed from blood to betrayer, from sibling to enemy. And if she thought I would let her walk down that aisle, draped in luxury stolen from me, without consequence, she was gravely mistaken. In that moment, sitting across from her as she preened about centerpieces and champagne towers, I felt something shift inside me, something permanent, something final. In that moment, I stopped being her sister and became her enemy. If stealing my money was a knife to the back, what I uncovered next was poison in my veins. I thought the worst was behind me when I learned she had siphoned my savings into her wedding. That revelation was enough to break me, to turn every memory we had into a lie. But betrayal has layers, and I hadn't yet touched the deepest ones. What I was about to uncover made the theft look almost merciful in comparison. It began on an ordinary evening. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't trying to dig up more hurt. But life has a way of forcing truths into the light when you least expect it. I had stopped by her apartment to drop off something our mother had sent over. She wasn't home yet, but her laughter drifted up the hallway long before she appeared. She wasn't alone. I recognized the voices of two of her bridesmaids, women who treated her like royalty and me like a distant inconvenience. I was about to knock when I froze. Through the thin door, I heard her voice, sharp and mocking, the kind of laugh she reserved for cruelty. "Honestly," she sneered, "my sister is pathetic. She acts like she's so important. But really, she's nothing. She'd never dare expose me, even if she knew everything. She doesn't have the guts." Her words sliced through me like glass. My breath caught, my chest tightened, and for a moment I felt dizzy, like the floor was tilting beneath me. Pathetic. That was what she thought of me. Not loyal, not loving, not supportive. Pathetic? She didn't just steal from me. She reduced me to a joke for her amusement. Her friends laughed, egging her on, and she continued, her tone dripping with arrogance. "She's obsessed with me, honestly, always trying to insert herself into my life. It's sad. But hey, it works for me. She pays, I shine." The anger that surged in me was volcanic. My fists clenched, nails digging into my palms so hard I nearly drew blood. I wanted to slam open that door, to confront her, to show her that I wasn't the weak little shadow she painted me to be. But something held me back. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the heartbreak that wrapped around me like chains. Or maybe it was the dawning realization that her cruelty ran deeper than I had ever imagined. I backed away from the door, each step heavier than the last, my ears still ringing with her laughter. By the time I reached the street, my tears were spilling. Freely, hot and relentless. It wasn't just the words themselves. It was what they meant. She had never seen me as a sister. To her, I was a tool, a leash she kept around my neck to tug when she needed more. Our bond wasn't love, it was control. And I had been too blind to see it. But the betrayal didn't stop there. Because not long after, I stumbled upon something even more poisonous. The lies she told her fiancé. I had always liked him. He seemed kind, steady, the type of man who could balance her sharp edges. I thought maybe he would be the one person who could soften her, ground her, make her less cruel. But one evening at a family dinner, I noticed the way he looked at me. Not with kindness, but with suspicion. When I tried to make small talk, his answers were clipped, his eyes cold. It confused me, unsettled me. Later that night, I overheard them in the kitchen. My sister's voice was hushed but urgent, weaving a web of lies with practiced ease. "She's just jealous," she told him. "She's been obsessed with me her whole life. That's why she makes up these stories about money. She wants to ruin my happiness because she doesn't have her own." My stomach twisted, bile rising in my throat. Jealous, obsessed. She wasn't just mocking me behind closed doors. She was rewriting reality, turning me into the villain in her story. And the worst part was that he believed her. I could hear it in the way he reassured her, in the way he promised not to let me come between them. That night, I sat alone in my car long after I left their house, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. My sister hadn't just stolen from me. She hadn't just mocked me. She had gone further. She had poisoned the well, ensuring that anyone who might have been on my side now saw me as the problem. She had isolated me, silenced me, erased me from the narrative of her life. The heartbreak was suffocating. I replayed every memory of us as children, every promise we made, every time I swore I would always protect her. And now here I was, being painted as a jealous, bitter intruder in her story. The bond I had worshipped, the love I had clung to, was nothing but a leash she used to keep me obedient. But as the tears dried on my cheeks that night, something else began to stir within me. Suspense wrapped around me, whispering that maybe she was right about one thing. Maybe I had been too weak, too forgiving, too afraid to expose her. Maybe I had let her believe I would never fight back. And maybe that was about to change, because as much as it broke me to realize the depth of her betrayal, it also lit a fire I hadn't felt before. A fire that told me she had underestimated me. A fire that promised me I wouldn't stay silent forever. But she underestimated me, and that was her fatal mistake. Revenge isn't born in fire. It starts as a spark, quiet and controlled, waiting to ignite. After that night, after hearing her voice drip with venom as she called me pathetic and twisted lies to her fiancé, something inside me shifted permanently. I had spent months drowning in tears, choking on heartbreak, shackled by the belief that love could fix what she had broken. But grief eventually dries up, leaving behind something harder, something sharper. My tears had run their course. What replaced them wasn't sadness anymore. It was calculation. I stopped crying and I started thinking. Not the frantic kind of thinking that comes from panic, but the deliberate, icy kind that comes when you finally accept the truth. She was never going to change. She was never going to repay me, or apologize, or treat me like a sister. She had carved her success out of my sacrifices, and she was reveling in it. And if I wanted justice, if I wanted even a shred of dignity back, I couldn't wait for her to hand it to me. I had to take it. At first, the thought of revenge scared me. It felt unnatural, like slipping into a coat that didn't fit. I wasn't the vengeful type. I had always been the forgiver, the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over. But the more I replayed her words in my mind, pathetic, obsessed, jealous, the more they burned like gasoline poured over the spark inside me. She had mocked me for being weak. She had paraded my silence as proof that I would never fight back. And suddenly revenge didn't feel unnatural anymore. It felt necessary. I began small, quietly, carefully. If she wanted to cast me as a fool, I would let her believe it a little longer, because people who think you're weak never see the blade coming. I smiled when she mocked me. I nodded when she lied. I kept my head down and let her bask in her false security. But behind that mask of compliance, I was collecting. Every insult she hurled became fuel. Every lie she told became evidence. I started saving receipts, bank statements, messages, anything that could prove where my money had gone. I scrolled back through old texts where she begged for loans, where she promised repayment, where she wrapped her manipulation in honeyed words. I printed them out, highlighted them, tucked them away like precious jewels. Each piece was a brick in the foundation of a weapon I was quietly building. But it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the story. I began paying closer attention to the way she talked to people, the way she curated her image. I noticed how often she contradicted herself, how carefully she edited the truth to make herself look flawless. She told one version of events to her fiancé, another to our parents, yet another to her friends. I started keeping track, writing down details, building a map of her lies. And the more I documented, the clearer it became. Her entire world was a house of cards, delicately balanced on deception, and all it would take was one carefully aimed breath to send it tumbling down. In my quiet hours, when the weight of everything pressed down on me, I would close my eyes and picture it. Her wedding day, the flowers, the music, the guests leaning in with admiration, and then collapse. Gasps filling the room, whispers spreading like wildfire. her smile faltering as the truth cut through her facade. I could almost hear the silence after the storm, almost feel the release of years of humiliation unraveling in one perfect moment of justice. That vision became my anchor. It pulled me through the nights when the anger threatened to consume me, when the heartbreak threatened to break me again. It reminded me that I wasn't powerless, that I wasn't pathetic, that I had a weapon she didn't even know existed, the truth. But the suspense of keeping it all hidden was its own kind of torture. Every time she walked into a room, glowing with stolen confidence, my fingers itched to rip her mask off right then and there. Every family dinner where she bragged about her hard work, I had to bite my tongue until it nearly bled. Every smug glance she threw me, every dismissive laugh, tested my resolve. But I held on, because timing was everything, and if I wanted the collapse to be complete, it had to happen when it mattered most. I studied her like a hunter studies prey. I learned her patterns, her weaknesses, the moments when her guard slipped. I noticed how she panicked when someone questioned her spending, how quickly she shifted blame when she was cornered. I watched her smile falter when her fiancé asked too many questions, saw the flicker of fear she tried to hide. And I tucked those observations away, storing them alongside my evidence, ready to weave them into a weapon sharp enough to cut through her lies. And slowly, something unexpected began to grow inside me, a sense of power I hadn't felt in years. For so long, she had controlled the narrative. She had painted me as weak, as jealous, as irrelevant. But now I was the one with the story, the one holding the strings. She thought she was the puppeteer, but she didn't realize she was already dancing to my silent tune. I began to smile more, not out of joy, but out of anticipation. Every step she took toward her wedding, every brag she made, every lie she spun, brought her closer to the edge of a cliff she didn't know she was standing on. And I was the one who had built that cliff, brick by brick, lie by lie, waiting for the perfect moment to push. My heart still ached. The betrayal still cut deep. But the heartbreak no longer paralyzed me. It sharpened me. It gave me purpose. And in that strange, twisted way, it gave me strength. Because nothing fuels resolve like the fire of betrayal. She wanted a fairy tale. She wanted to be the princess in the story, adored by all, untouchable in her tower of lies. But she forgot one thing. Every fairy tale has an ending, and sometimes it's not the princess who gets her happily ever after. She wanted a fairy tale ending, but I was going to turn her story into a nightmare. I thought I had found an ally, but snakes always find each other in the grass. By the time I reached this stage, the secret I carried was burning a hole inside me. The evidence I was collecting, the venomous words I replayed, the vision of her fairy tale collapsing. It was all too heavy to keep locked in my chest without bursting. I needed someone to look me in the eye and tell me I wasn't crazy, someone to remind me that my pain was real, that my anger was justified, that I wasn't fighting a ghost in my own head. For weeks I wrestled with the decision. Trust had already betrayed me once in the cruelest way possible. Why risk it again? But anger can make you reckless, and heartbreak can make you desperate. I wanted a witness. I wanted an ally. I wanted proof that I wasn't completely alone in this war. So I chose someone I believed I could trust. A relative who had always seemed sympathetic, who had once told me I was too forgiving for my own good. Or maybe a close friend who had seen glimpses of my sister's manipulative side. The details blur now, but at the time I was certain this was the person who would stand by me. We met late one afternoon at a small cafe, the kind with chip mugs and the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. My hand shook as I stirred my drink, not from the caffeine, but from the weight of what I was about to unload. I started slow, circling around the truth, testing the waters with vague complaints, and when they leaned in, concern etched across their face, I let it all out. I told them everything, how she had drained my savings under the guise of sisterly love, how she mocked me behind my back, calling me pathetic, how she twisted the story to her fiancé, painting me as the jealous, obsessed sibling, how I had evidence, real evidence, of her lies and theft. My voice cracked at times, but their nods, their murmurs of agreement, pushed me forward. For the first time in months I felt lighter. Their words were soothing. You don't deserve this. I believe you. You're doing the right thing by planning to expose her. My chest loosened, and for a moment I let myself believe I wasn't fighting alone anymore. They leaned across the table, placed their hand on mine, and whispered, Don't worry, I've got your back. I wanted to cry from relief. That was all I had needed. Someone to remind me that I wasn't crazy, that the battle I was preparing to wage wasn't in vain. I walked out of that cafe with my head a little higher, my steps a little steadier. For the first time in so long, I had hope that when the truth came crashing down, I wouldn't be standing in the rubble by myself. But betrayal, it seems, was a language my sister had taught everyone around her, because not 2 days later I noticed a change in her, subtle at first, but undeniable. The smug confidence in her eyes had sharpened into something colder, something calculating. She was more careful with her words, more cautious around me, as though she had been tipped off. And then it clicked. My so-called ally hadn't been an ally at all. They had run straight back to her, spilling everything I had said. My stomach sank, fury rising in its place. How could I have been so foolish? How could I have trusted anyone when I already knew how deep her influence ran? She had spun her web so wide that even those who pretended to support me were tangled in it. Later I confirmed it. I overheard her on the phone, her voice low but triumphant. She suspects, but don't worry, she won't do anything. She thinks she's planning some big reveal, but I've got it covered. The rage that boiled in me then was unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was war. My ally hadn't just failed me. They had armed her with the knowledge that I was no longer blind, and that shifted the entire balance of the game. Now she was on guard. Now she was watching me, testing me, baiting me. Every interaction became a chess move. If I asked a question, she answered with a smile too perfect to be real. If I stayed quiet, she smirked like she already knew my thoughts. It was as though she was daring me, taunting me, waiting for me to slip. The heartbreak of losing my ally was sharp, but it quickly hardened into something else. Resolve. If I couldn't trust anyone, then I would trust no one. Not family, not friends, not relatives who claimed to care. The only person I could rely on was myself. And maybe that was better, because allies can be bought, manipulated, seduced. But my pain, my rage, my hunger for justice, those were incorruptible. Still, the suspense was suffocating. Every day felt like walking a tightrope above fire. One wrong step, one wrong word, and she would know too much. I had to keep pretending, had to play my role carefully, had to let her believe she was still in control. Because if she sensed the storm gathering, she would find a way to silence me before I could unleash it. So I smiled. I nodded. I let her believe the betrayal had broken me completely. I let her laugh, let her flaunt, let her play the part of the golden bride-to-be. And all the while, beneath that mask of defeat, I sharpened my blade. Because she thought she had turned the tables. She thought that by poisoning my one ally, she had cornered me into submission. But she was wrong. All she had done was remind me that snakes slither together, and that when you know where the nest is, you don't run from it. You burn it to the ground. Now the hunter had become the hunted, and I had to play my role carefully. Sometimes the best way to stab a traitor is with a smile. By the time my so-called ally betrayed me, I realized something important. If I wanted to win this war, I couldn't just attack her outright. I had to play her game, and play it better. She thrived on perception, on appearances, on weaving lies so convincing that even the people closest to me believed them. If I wanted to destroy her, I needed to feed that illusion, to let her believe I was still the same weak sister who would never dare stand against her. So I put on the mask. I became the doting sister again, the one who nodded at her stories, who laughed at her jokes, who played the loyal bridesmaid eager to help make her big day perfect. It felt unnatural at first, like forcing myself into a costume I had outgrown. But every time she smirked, every time she gloated, every time she reveled in my silence, I reminded myself why I was doing this. And strangely, it worked. She bought it, completely. She gloated even harder, mistaking my compliance for surrender. She believed she had broken me so thoroughly that I couldn't possibly rise again. In her mind, I was defeated, a puppet she controlled, a shadow she no longer needed to fear. And while she basked in that delusion, I sharpened my resolve, because there is nothing more dangerous than the enemy you underestimate. I remember the day she asked me to come wedding dress shopping with her. Her eyes glittered with smug satisfaction as she twirled in gowns that sparkled under the store's harsh lights. "You're lucky," she teased, her tone dripping with mockery. Not everyone gets to see their sister look like a queen before the world does. I smiled. I even clapped, pretending to gush about how beautiful she looked. But inside, as I watched her prance in those dresses, I imagined something entirely different. I imagined her standing in front of the same crowd on her wedding day, only instead of admiration, she was met with whispers of disgust, gasps of shock, and the icy silence of betrayal unveiled. I imagined the fabric of that gown becoming a prison, trapping her as the truth unraveled around her. Every pearl she tried on reminded me of the money she had stolen from me. Every veil she placed on her head looked more like a shroud than a crown. And when she finally found the one, the dress that made her eyes water with triumph, I had to turn away to hide my smirk. Because to her, it was the dress of her dreams. But to me, it was the costume she would wear to her own undoing. She continued to lean on me for help, delegating tasks as though I were her personal assistant. I chose flowers with her, tasted cakes, reviewed invitations. To her, it was proof of her dominance. She believed I was working to elevate her, to make her day unforgettable. And in a way, she was right. I was making it unforgettable. Just not for the reasons she imagined. There was symbolism in every detail I touched. The roses she adored, I saw thorns hidden beneath their petals, ready to pierce her when she least expected it. The gold-trimmed invitations, to me they weren't invitations to a wedding, but summons to a reckoning. Even the champagne she insisted on sampling became a symbol, bubbly and sweet on the surface, but bitter. Once swallowed, and she never noticed. She was too wrapped up in herself, too consumed by her own reflection, to see the trap being built around her. She thought she was weaving her fairy tale, but in reality she was tying the noose tighter with every passing day. Still, the act wasn't easy. Every time I looked at her, I had to suppress the anger that simmered just below my skin. Every time she dismissed me, belittled me, or laughed at me in front of others, I had to bite down so hard on my tongue I could taste blood. The heartbreak was always there, a constant ache that reminded me this wasn't just about revenge. This was about the death of the sister I thought I had. But even that pain fueled me, because revenge doesn't thrive on joy. It thrives on the ashes of love turned to betrayal. The suspense of living this double life consumed me. I was walking a tightrope above fire, balancing the role of the good sister with the secret of the avenger. One slip, one crack in my facade, and she would know. And if she knew, she would strike first. So I smiled wider, laughed louder, and bowed lower. And every time she praised herself for breaking me, I savored the irony, because she had no idea that I was the one setting the stage for her fall. Sometimes at night, when I was alone, I would picture her face when it all came crashing down. The shock, the disbelief, the moment when she realized I had been playing her all along. That vision became my lullaby, the only thing that soothed me to sleep. She thought she had broken me. She thought I was her puppet, her servant, her silent shadow. But she didn't realize that while she was basking in her victory, I was sharpening the knife. She thought she had broken me, but I was the one sharpening the knife. The truth is the sharpest blade, and I was determined to wield it. By now, the act of playing her loyal sister had become second nature. My smile was my mask, my silence my armor, my fake laughter my weapon. But beneath the surface, I was no longer just imagining her downfall. I was building it. Piece by piece, I was weaving together the truth, the one thing she couldn't twist, couldn't buy, couldn't bury. It started with the obvious, financial records. Late at night, when the world was asleep and my heart beat like a drum in the dark, I pulled out the trail of bank transfers, checks, and withdrawals that traced every dollar I had given her. I highlighted the dates, marked the amounts, created a map of the money that had flowed out of my account and into her hands. Each line on the page was a scar, a reminder of the trust I had once placed in her. And as the pile of evidence grew, so did my resolve. But money was just a beginning. She had built her life on lies, and I knew those lies would betray her if I looked closely enough. So I dug deeper. I scrolled back through old text messages, screenshots of her begging, promising, manipulating. I saved them in a folder, labeled innocuously, something she'd never suspect. With every message I reread, I felt the sting of her words all over again. You're the only one I can count on. I'll pay you back next month, I promise. Don't you trust me? The irony was suffocating. Trust had been her weapon, and now it was mine. Still, I needed more. Lies don't exist in isolation, they create ripples. And those ripples were everywhere if I paid attention. I started listening more carefully at family gatherings, jotting down mental notes when her stories didn't align. To our parents, she claimed she had saved for years to afford the wedding. To her friends, she bragged about a promotion that didn't exist. To her fiancé, she said her parents were helping her with the costs. 3 different stories, all neatly tailored for their audiences. But none of them matched, and I knew then that her web was more tangled than she could control. I began keeping a journal, writing down every contradiction, every inconsistency, every thread I could pull. The journal became my Bible, a record of the cracks in her glass castle. Some days I read it back to myself, marveling at how long I had let her lies blind me. Other days I cried into its pages, mourning the sister I thought I had. Because every entry was proof that the person I loved didn't exist. She had been replaced long ago by someone who only saw me as a resource to exploit. But as the evidence piled up, so did the weight of what I was planning. Late at night, staring at the documents spread across my desk, I asked myself the questions that gnawed at my conscience. Was I becoming like her? Was revenge making me cruel, calculated, manipulative? Would exposing her destroy me as much as it destroyed her? There were moments when the heartbreak almost broke me again. I would remember the little girl with tangled hair, the one who once defended me in a schoolyard, and wonder if I could really strip her life bare in front of everyone she loved. The thought of her crying, begging for mercy haunted me, because even though she had shown me none, some part of me still remembered the bond we once had. But then I would replay her voice in my mind, calling me pathetic, mocking me, painting me as jealous to her fiancé. I would see her parading in her stolen gown, laughing at the expense of my silence. And the doubt hardened into anger again. This wasn't cruelty. This was justice. She had written the script with her lies. I was just turning the spotlight on. The suspense of it all consumed me. I was carrying dynamite in my hands, waiting for the right moment to strike the match. Every time I added another piece of proof to the pile, I imagined the look on her face when the world saw it all. The gasps, the whispers, the silence that would cut deeper than any insult she had ever thrown at me. And then, just when I thought I had enough, I stumbled across something that changed everything. Something that made my decision for me. I wasn't even looking for it. I had gone through her social media, her emails, her messages so many times I could recite them in my sleep. But one evening, while scrolling through a folder she had carelessly left synced on a shared cloud, I found screenshots. Not of me, not of the money, but of conversations with someone else. Someone who wasn't her fiancé. My breath caught in my throat as I read the words. They weren't innocent. They weren't platonic. They were laced with intimacy, with promises, with confessions that had no place in the life of a woman about to walk down the aisle. And suddenly, I realized the truth wasn't just about the money anymore. She had been lying about everything, to her fiancé, to her friends, to our family, and worst of all, to herself. I closed the laptop slowly, my hands trembling, my heart pounding. For a moment I sat in silence, trying to process what I had just uncovered. The betrayal had always been personal before, me against her. But now it was bigger. This wasn't just about my pain. This was about her entire life unraveling. And in that instant, my hesitation vanished. The question of whether revenge would destroy me no longer mattered, because I wasn't just carrying justice for myself anymore. I was carrying the truth of who she really was. And then I stumbled across something that made my decision for me. Every bride fears a secret surfacing, and my sister's was darker than I imagined. When I first uncovered the evidence, I thought it was just another piece of the puzzle, more ammunition to prove what I already knew. But the more I read, the more I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't just about money or lies or the petty cruelty she had inflicted on me for years. This was about the very foundation of her so-called perfect life, the bedrock of her engagement, the truth that had the power to topple everything she was trying to build. At first, I couldn't believe it. I sat in front of my screen, scrolling through the screenshots again and again, my heart pounding in my chest so hard it felt like it might break through my ribs. The words were undeniable. Messages dripping with intimacy, promises whispered to someone who was not her fiancé, flirty confessions, Secret plans, things that had no business being said by a woman weeks away from walking down the aisle. Shock hit me first, so heavy it nearly knocked the breath out of me. For years I had painted her cruelty as something personal, a weapon aimed only at me. But here it was, proof that her deception was so much bigger. She wasn't just a bad sister, she was a liar, a manipulator, a woman willing to sell illusions not just to me, but to the man who thought he was pledging his life to her. The anger came next, hot and searing. I thought of her fiancé, a kind, decent man who had always treated me with respect until she poisoned him against me. I thought of the way he had defended her, the way he had believed her lies about me being jealous, obsessed, bitter. And all the while, she had been the one weaving the biggest lie of all. My hands trembled with fury as I imagined his face when the truth finally hit him. But underneath the anger, heartbreak pulsed, because for all her flaws, for all the poison she had poured into my life, there was still a part of me that wished she had chosen differently, that she had chosen honesty or kindness, or even the dignity of walking away instead of compounding lies upon lies. I remembered the little girl she once was, the one who swore she wanted a love story like the ones we saw in movies. And now here she was, standing on the edge of marriage, not with love in her heart, but with deceit dripping from her lips. The suspense of holding this secret consumed me. Every day I walked around with it burning in my chest like a live coal. I would sit across from her at family dinners, watch her giggle as she leaned into her fiancé's arm, and wonder, does he really know her at all? Does he have any idea who he is promising forever to? The thought of him standing there, clueless, while she paraded her false purity in front of everyone made my blood boil. And yet, the power was intoxicating. For once, I wasn't the weak one. For once, she didn't have all the control. I held it now, the secret that could unravel her world, the blade sharp enough to sever every tie she had worked so hard to manipulate. In my hands, I didn't just hold justice for myself. I held her future. I held the choice between her happily ever after and her public disgrace. That power scared me, even as it thrilled me. Late at night, I would stare at the evidence, my heart racing, torn between two voices in my head. One whispered, "Don't stoop to her level. Don't let revenge turn you into her." The other hissed, "She deserves it. She stole from you, mocked you, destroyed your trust, and now you can destroy her. This is your chance to take everything back." Some nights the heartbreak won. I cried, mourning the sister I had lost, mourning the bond I had once believed unbreakable. But other nights the anger blazed brighter, and I would smile through my tears, imagining her face when the truth was revealed. Suspense, grief, rage, they all tangled inside me, twisting tighter each day as the wedding loomed closer. I started to imagine the reveal, the timing, the delivery, the sheer shockwave it would send through the room. Would I tell him privately, sparing him the humiliation of learning the truth in front of hundreds of guests? Or would I let it drop like a bomb in the middle of their vows, making sure every single person saw her mask rip away in real time? The choices haunted me, thrilling and terrifying at once. And as I weighed them, I realized something important. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about truth, about justice, about making sure that the lies didn't win. She had built her empire on deception, and for once, I had the chance to stop her before she pulled another soul into her web. The closer the wedding drew, the more certain I became. Every dress fitting, every bridal shower, every smug glance she threw me only added fuel to the fire. She thought she was untouchable. She thought she had silenced me, broken me, erased me. But she didn't know that I was holding her greatest secret like a dagger, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And then, at last, the day came. The music swelled, echoing through the hall, filling the air with the promise of celebration. Guests leaned in, their faces glowing with anticipation, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. My sister stood there in her gown, radiant in the eyes of everyone around her, blissfully ignorant of the truth I carried in my pocket. And as I watched her bask in her illusion, a calm washed over me, because I knew what was coming. I knew that in just moments her fairy tale would crumble. And when the music began to play on her wedding day, I knew this was the moment. The hall shimmered with lights, laughter, and luxury. The perfect illusion. The wedding day dawned like a scene out of a movie. The sky was clear, the air crisp, and the venue glowed with the kind of perfection you only see on carefully curated magazine covers. From the moment I stepped into the hall, I was surrounded by beauty so meticulously crafted it almost felt unreal. Towering floral arrangements spilled from golden vases, candles flickered in crystal holders, and a string quartet played melodies so soft they seemed to float through the air like silk. To everyone else, it was paradise. To me, it was a gilded lie. Every corner of that hall screamed wealth, success, love, the fairy tale she had always wanted people to believe in. Guests gasped in admiration as they entered, marveling at the extravagance, whispering about how lucky she was to have such a perfect life. And in the center of it all stood my sister, glowing in her wedding gown, her smile wide enough to blind. She basked in their praises, feeding on them like oxygen. I stood in the shadows, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it above the music. On the outside, I was silent, composed, the dutiful sister watching her moment unfold. But inside, I was a storm, a hurricane building strength with every passing second. I had carried heartbreak for so long it had become part of me, but now it pulsed alongside something stronger. Suspense, anticipation, the razor-sharp thrill of knowing I held the match that could burn her castle down. I watched as family members surrounded her, showering her with compliments. "She's stunning," my mother whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "She deserves this day." My father clapped her fiancé on the back, congratulating him on winning the heart of such a special woman. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout that none of it was real, that the roses were bought with stolen money, that the diamonds sparkled because I had dimmed my own future to fund them. But I held my tongue because I knew the silence wouldn't last. Her friends circled her like satellites, fawning over her beauty, adjusting her veil, smoothing her dress. She giggled, tossing her hair, soaking up every ounce of adoration as though it were proof she had won. And in a way she had. For now. She had convinced the world she was the heroine of this story. But what none of them knew was that I was holding the final chapter, and it didn't end with her in triumph. The heartbreak still pricked at me, sharp as glass. Watching her pose for photographs, laughing with the kind of ease only lies can buy, I remembered the girl she used to be, the girl who once held my hand under the covers at night when storms rattled the windows, the girl who swore we'd always stand together no matter what. That ghost haunted me as she twirled in her gown, radiant in her deception. But even as tears threatened to rise, I shoved them back down. That girl no longer existed. She had killed her long ago. What stood before me now was a stranger, a thief in silk and lace. The suspense was unbearable. Every tick of the clock, every note from the quartet, every flash from a camera lens felt like it was leading me closer to the moment. My palms itched, my throat tightened, my body vibrated with the weight of the secret I carried. I rehearsed the words in my mind over and over. How I would say them, when I would say them, how I would look her in the eye as the mask fell away. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, the wind whipping around me, knowing that once I leapt, there would be no going back. I studied her fiancé as he moved through the room, shaking hands, smiling at guests. He looked proud, confident, blissfully unaware that the woman he was about to vow his life to had already betrayed him. I almost pitied him, almost, because soon he would know the truth, and though it would shatter him, it would also free him. My sister caught my gaze across the room at one point. For a split second our eyes locked. She smirked, tilting her chin as though daring me to challenge her. That smirk nearly broke my composure. It was the same smirk she had worn when she mocked me to her friends, the same one she had flashed when she dismissed my pleas for repayment, the same one she had given when she cut me out of her bridal party. That smirk had haunted me for years, and soon I would wipe it from her face forever. The ceremony began to take shape. Guests found their seats, the musicians shifted into softer melodies, and whispers filled the air. I moved among them like a ghost, unseen, unheard, yet carrying the power to change everything. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the adrenaline coursing through me. Revenge had never tasted so close. As she prepared to walk down the aisle, I lingered in the back, watching the scene unfold. Her gown shimmered under the lights, her veil trailed behind her like a cloud, and the guests rose to their feet in awe. The air buzzed with admiration, the illusion so perfect it almost made me doubt myself. Almost. But then I remembered the bank statements, the messages, the lies whispered in secret conversations. I remembered the screenshots that proved her infidelity, the contradictions that wove her web of deceit, and the doubt turned to fire again. Heartbreak had brought me here, but suspense was pushing me forward. This was no longer just about me. It was about every person in that room who deserved the truth. It was about her fiancé, who had been tricked into pledging his life to a fraud. It was about justice, raw, unvarnished, undeniable. And as the music swelled, echoing through the hall, I felt the moment arrive. She stepped forward, radiant, glowing, believing the world was hers. Guests gasped, some even wiped away tears at the beauty of it all. My family beamed with pride, oblivious to the storm about to rip through their carefully curated illusion. She believed she was walking into her happily ever after, but she was walking into my trap. Every fairy tale has a villain, and for once, I wasn't afraid to play the part. The music swelled, the guests rose to their feet, and my sister floated down the aisle like a goddess draped in silk and pearls. To everyone else, it was a vision of perfection. To me, it was a stage, and I was about to steal the scene. My heart thundered in my chest as I watched her glide forward, her smile radiant, her eyes glistening with the thrill of victory. She believed this was her crowning moment, the day she would cement her image as flawless, adored, untouchable. But she didn't know that I carried the truth in my hands like a weapon, sharp enough to slice through her lies in a single stroke. As the officiant began to speak, my palms grew slick, my breath shallow. I could feel the weight of the room pressing down on me, the laughter, the admiration, the collective awe, and beneath it all, the knowledge that in just a few moments, everything would change. I wasn't just carrying a secret anymore. I was carrying dynamite, and the fuse was burning. She stood across from her fiancé, gazing at him with rehearsed devotion. He smiled back, completely unaware that the woman he was about to vow his life to had been lying to him all along. The sight of it, his blind trust, her calculated performance, made something snap inside me. I stepped forward, the sound of my voice cut through the air like a blade. "Stop." Every head in the room turned toward me. The music faltered, the whispers started. My sister froze, her smile stiffening, her eyes narrowing as they locked onto mine. For the first time that day, her mask slipped, just slightly, just enough for me to see the flicker of fear behind her eyes. "I can't let this happen," I said, my voice shaking at it first, but growing stronger with each word. "Because this wedding, this entire spectacle, is built on lies." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My sister's fiancé frowned, confusion clouding his face. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice strained. I pulled the first piece of evidence from my bag. The bank records, the proof of every transfer, every dollar siphoned from me to her. I held them up for everyone to see. "She didn't pay for this wedding," I declared. "I did. With money she begged from me, money she promised to repay, money she used to build this fairy tale." Whispers surged, growing louder, filling the hall like a wave. My parents looked stunned, their mouths opening and closing in disbelief. My sister's friends exchanged wide-eyed glances, their admiration flickering into doubt. But I wasn't finished. I pulled out the second weapon, the screenshots, the messages laced with betrayal. "And it's not just the money," I continued, my voice steady now, fueled by years of pain turned into fire. "She's been lying to you," I said, turning to her fiancé. "Not just about the wedding, but about everything. She's been unfaithful. I have proof." The color drained from his face as I handed him the papers. He scanned them, his hands trembling, his eyes darkening with every line he read. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the faint rustle of the pages in his hands. My sister's face contorted, panic flashing across her features before she plastered on a smile that looked more like a grimace. "This is ridiculous," she spat, her voice too high, too defensive. "She's jealous. She's always been jealous. She's making this up because she can't stand to see me happy." But the proof spoke louder than her protests. The whispers turned into murmurs, the murmurs into judgment. Guests shook their heads, some glaring at her, others looking away in discomfort. The facade she had built, so carefully crafted, was crumbling in real time. Her fiancé's hands dropped to his sides, the papers falling to the floor. His eyes met hers, no longer soft with love, but hard with betrayal. Is it true? He asked, his voice breaking. Tell me the truth. She stammered, her words tripping over each other, but the silence that followed was louder than any denial. He stepped back from her, his jaw clenched, his chest heaving with the weight of realization. And in that moment, the illusion shattered completely. Her dream wedding dissolved before her eyes. The guests who had adored her now whispered with disdain. The family who had praised her now sat frozen in shame. The fiancé who had once been her prize now looked at her as though she were a stranger. She tried to speak again, but every word only dug her deeper. She's lying, she insisted, pointing at me, her voice shrill. She's always hated me. She's trying to ruin this. But the proof lay at her feet, undeniable, in black and white. For the first time in her life, my sister's lies couldn't save her. As the chaos swirled around us, gasps, whispers, the scraping of chairs as guests shifted uncomfortably, I stood perfectly still, my heart strangely calm. For years I had carried heartbreak like a chain around my neck. For years I had been silenced, mocked, erased. But in that moment, watching her facade crumble, I felt something I hadn't in years. Freedom. And as her dream collapsed, I felt something I hadn't in years. Freedom. Betrayal leaves scars, but sometimes those scars are the proof that you survived. The silence that followed my revelation was deafening. The music had stopped, the whispers had quieted, and all that remained was the shattered illusion of what was supposed to be her perfect day. I looked around the room, at the faces that had once gazed at her with admiration, and saw only disbelief, disappointment, even disgust. The spell had been broken. The fairy tale was over. My sister stood frozen in her gown, her face pale beneath the makeup, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. The veil that had once made her look angelic now hung limp, a curtain of shame. She reached for her fiancé, desperation in her eyes, but he stepped back, his expression hard and unyielding. The love that had once softened his gaze was gone, replaced by something colder, sharper. Betrayal mirrored in his eyes. I can't do this, he whispered, his voice breaking. He shook his head, the papers still crumpled in his trembling hand. I don't even know who you are anymore. And with that, he turned and walked away. The sound of his footsteps echoed louder than any music ever could. Gasps rippled through the hall, guests shifting uncomfortably, some standing, some whispering, all of them witnesses to her downfall. My parents sat frozen, their hands clasped together, their faces etched with a mix of horror and grief. For the first time, they saw her for who she truly was. Not the shining star, not the golden child, but a liar who had built her empire on the backs of others. She called out his name, her voice cracking, but it was too late. He didn't look back. The heartbreak in her eyes might once have undone me. Once I might have rushed to comfort her, to shield her from the consequences of her actions. But not anymore. I had carried heartbreak for too long, and now it was her turn to feel its weight. The difference was, hers was self-inflicted. As the whispers grew louder, she turned on me. Her eyes burned with hatred, her finger pointing as though I were the villain in her story. You did this, she screamed, her voice shrill, echoing through the ruined hall. You destroyed me. I met her gaze, calm, steady, unflinching. No, I said softly, but with all the conviction in my soul. You destroyed yourself. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable, because deep down, everyone knew it was true. She had chosen greed over love, lies over truth, betrayal over loyalty. All I had done was pull back the curtain. The aftermath unfolded like the slow collapse of a house of cards. Guests began to leave, their faces turned away, some shaking their heads, others murmuring to each other as they slipped out. The once glittering hall now felt suffocating, the flowers wilting under the weight of the silence, the candles flickering weakly in the heavy air. What had been a stage for her triumph was now nothing but ruins, and in those ruins she stood alone. I walked out quietly, my heels clicking against the marble floor, each step carrying me farther away from her chaos and closer to my own freedom. The cool evening air hit my face like a baptism, washing away the heaviness I had carried for years. For the first time in so long, I felt lighter, as though invisible chains had been cut from my soul. As I stood outside, looking back at the hall glowing under the night sky, I couldn't help but notice the symbolism. The place that had been built on lies, financed by my sacrifice, was now nothing more than a graveyard of broken illusions. The music was gone, the laughter silenced, the fairy tale shattered. But I was still standing, stronger, freer. I didn't just ruin her wedding. I reclaimed my dignity. For years I had been her pawn, manipulated, mocked, discarded. But tonight I had stepped into my power. I had shown her and everyone else that I was not weak, not pathetic, not the jealous sister lurking in the shadows. I was the truth bearer, the survivor, the one who refused to be erased. The scars of her betrayal will never fully fade. They run deep, etched into the fabric of who I am. But I've come to realize something. Scars are not just reminders of pain. They are proof of survival, proof that I lived through the fire and came out the other side, stronger and sharper than before. My sister betrayed me for money. She thought she was buying her happiness, her fairy tale, her crown. But what she lost that night was priceless. She lost her fiancé. She lost her reputation. She lost the illusion of power she had clung to so desperately. And in losing all of that, she revealed herself for what she truly was. And me? I gained something she could never steal. My strength, my voice, my freedom. As I walked away from that ruined hall, I didn't feel victorious in the way I thought I would. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about triumph over her. It was about reclaiming myself. I had been broken, silenced, humiliated, but I had risen. And that, more than anything else, was the justice I needed. Because in the end, justice isn't always about watching the other person fall. Sometimes it's about standing tall in the rubble of what they tried to bury you under and realizing they can't touch you anymore. She betrayed me for money, but what she lost was priceless. And what I gained was something she could never steal: my strength. If this story kept you hooked, hit like so more people hear it. Click subscribe and turn on the bell. I have more betrayals and justice stories you won't want to miss. And tell me in the comments, was I right to destroy her wedding, or would you have done something different?